Gentlemen, allow me to take this opportunity to welcome you to Group 935. This is a prestigious moment in the history of our race. You represent the future of technological advancement. You are the pioneers of human discovery. In your hands lies the destiny of mankind.
It's sometimes said the Earth has enough resources for every man's needs, but not to satisfy every man's greeds. For we have come so very far, but now the journey may almost be at its end. An ancient evil born so long ago now threatens the very existence of the human race as we know it. Obliviously unleashed upon the shelter of the earth by a secret working of egotistical scientists by the call sign of Gruppe 935. Overcome by the desires for weapons of war to ensure Nazi Germany's ultimate victory. But one particular researcher within this group possesses the knowledge and determination to reverse this disastrous sequence of events and to set everything right once again. Something which he is prepared to die for to achieve. A long time ago, an ancient black sun race of interdimensional beings lived in harmony with the universe, within a higher dimension known as the ether, the reality beyond perception, protecting the universe from the evils that sought to destroy it. These beings were known as the Vrilia, or more simply as the Keepers. Using the powers of the Vril, the Keepers maintained order and stability in the universe, creating transference devices which enabled quick travel between the many dimensions. As early humans slowly evolved over thousands of years, the Keepers kept watch from these dimensions, ensuring that humankind was protected from certain higher entities which sought to destroy the very fabric of life itself. The Keeper's only goal was to ensure life was preserved. Everything was fine and happy in the world of the Keepers until one day, forces and energies from the dark ether leached into the universe and twisted the minds of some of the Keepers. These Keepers revolted against their world, soon forming a group known only as the Apothicons. Inevitably, a universal civil war broke out between the Keepers and the Apothicons, claiming thousands of lives from these beings. But with the help from a group of 4 individuals called Primis, also known as the Ancients, who bore a striking resemblance to our 4 characters from Origins and wielded the 4 ancient elemental staffs and bows, the Keepers were eventually able to defeat the Apothicons and ensure their banishment to the Dark Ether. Think of the Dark Ether as the polar opposite to the regular ether, like heaven and hell. The normal ether is the good ether, where Richtofen went in Moon to gain control of the zombies and all those other useful powers. The Dark Ether, however, is the dimension of eternal pain and suffering. Anyway, during a period of millions of years in the Dark Ether, the Apothicons further devolved into twisted, squid-like, tentacle-bearing creatures who swore revenge against the Keepers and vowed to corrupt and destroy every last dimension in existence. To this day, the Keepers guard against this ancient evil, preventing the Apothicons from re-entering reality using their old Keeper transference devices, whilst also destroying anyone unfortunate enough to fall under the influence of the apothecans. Now, sometime after the Civil War, the one universe becomes fractured. This fracture causes the one and only universe to disintegrate into an infinite number of other spin-off variations / versions of this one universe. Think of it like this: if you were to crack a mirror and then look into it, there are many different shards of glass, each one containing a reflection of you. It doesn't mean that you've actually multiplied though. What this means instead is that the COD Zombies multiverse is not the style of multiverse, where another alternate universe is created every time a decision is made, in which whatever isn't done in said decision becomes what is done in the newly created alternate universe. Each of the millions of other universes were all created at one specific point in time, the fracture of the central universe. These universes do not multiply whenever a decision is made. The number of universes produced from the fracture will always remain at that number, and no more universes will ever be produced from here on out. Despite having been severely damaged, the central universe still remains intact, but within an interconnected flurry of millions of spin-off universes. The central universe will also sometimes be referred to as the 2.0 universe throughout this film. You'll understand why later. Anyhow, each of these new spin-off universes / timelines created from the fracture contains events different to that of the central universe, some of which are only slightly different, some of which are majorly different. One such example of a majorly different universe to that of the original is the World at War timeline. The God Zombies storyline in World at War, Black Ops and Black Ops 2, except for Mob of the Dead and Origins, was nothing more than just a small piece of a much larger puzzle, in the sense that it was just a spin-off universe from the fracture of the central universe. A bit disappointing, but that's just how it is. This was the origins of the multiverse. Now, it's also important to understand that universes and dimensions are not the same thing. A dimension is like a higher reality. It's a world humans can't detect with our senses, but nevertheless, it's still there. For example, the ether, the dark ether, there's many more, they're just never mentioned. We live in the third dimension because our human senses can only detect things up to 3D. Anything 4D and beyond is simply undetectable by humans. To prove this, try to think of something higher than 3D. What would it look like? What would it feel like? How would you interact with it? You will probably find that you simply can't picture anything above 3D. This is because, as humans, we can't articulate anything more than 3D. The three dimensions we can interact with are commonly visualized on a graph as the X, Y, and Z axes. A universe, on the other hand, is an order of events. It can also be called a history, a timeline, a chronology, whatever. Within the universe resides all the dimensions and everything else in existence. However, due to the fracture of the central universe, there's now millions of alternate universes, each one containing a slightly different variation of events from the central universe. Each universe has its own unique copy of the ether, the dark ether, the apothecans, the characters, everything in existence. The beginning of the end begins in Morgue City, USA in the early 1940s. The city lives and breathes its vibrant theatrical scenes, jazz music and nightlife, attracting hordes of tourists from across both the country and the world. Even despite prohibition, criminal mobs continue to make thousands from the illegal distribution of alcohol, including that of which was run by mob boss Sal DeLuca, with Finn O'Leary, Billy Handsome and Albert Arlington as his right-hand men, bribing cops into turning a blind eye to their activities, until they were eventually brought to justice and sentenced to life in Alcatraz. Morgue City was at the epicenter of pre-war USA's greatness, harbouring all you'd come to expect from a pre-war American city. At least, from the outside it seems that way. An unnamed freelance reporter is sent to the city of Morgue to write a piece about the city's dazzling attractions, whilst covertly tracking down 4 specific individuals identified by the reporter's client, known as Mr. Rapt. These 4 individuals went by the names of Jessica Rose, Jackie Vincent, Floyd Campbell and Nero Blackstone. Beforehand, Mr. Rapt had ordered the reporter to travel to Alcatraz Island to interview an ex-prison guard by the name of Stanley Ferguson, or Brutus, to learn about how Sal DeLuca, Billy Handsome, Finn O'Leary and Albert the Weasel Arlington had all perished in a failed escape plan to escape Alcatraz back during 33. All for the reporter's article, of course. Afterwards, the reporter takes a tram and arrives in Morgue City to begin snooping around for information regarding Jessica Rose, Jackie Vincent, Floyd Campbell and Nero Blackstone. However, several weeks after arriving, the reporter couldn't help but sense that something was off about Morgue City. The mysterious disappearances of locals, unmarked cars travelling hastily across town, dark-suited men lurking in the shadows of street corners. Something wasn't sitting right about this city. Some days earlier, there had been a meteor shower which, unbeknownst to the reporter, had brought down traces of element 115, causing strange fungi to grow across the city. Of course, these fungi are the strange vegetation needing to be fumigated across Morgue City to provide random rewards in-game. However, the reporter couldn't help but notice how the locals paid little to no attention to the vegetation, acting almost as though this was just a normal occurrence for them. Maybe they simply didn't know what was going on, or maybe they were simply too afraid to speak out, in fear of being silenced from somewhere higher up. It was only some time later, when people began getting sick from the 115, that locals finally started waking up to the mysterious goings-on across their city. Little did they know, within a matter of weeks, how the sick would be resurrected. The reporter interviewed a local fruit seller in the market, who briefly described something similar happening in New England during 1882, although this individual was quick to hold his tongue when the reporter pressed him for further details. What actually happened in 1882 was an outbreak of the disease known as tuberculosis, or TB. Of course, at that point in time, medical science was virtually non-existent, and so people feared the disease was actually the result of resurrected vampires sucking blood from the living, leading locals to perform all kinds of sacrificial rituals to try to save themselves from these so-called vampires. A few days later, the reporter went back to the market, only to find the fruit seller was much more talkative. He told the reporter that when he was just a kid, his uncle used to tell him about how a dark force was looming over the city, in an interdimensional battle between good and evil taking place so close to the residents of Morgue City yet so far from the perception of their senses. A supposed cult known as the Ancient Order of the Keepers was said to be the only thing holding back the forces of this evil and the apocalypse it would bring if left unchecked. Amidst the darker corners of Morgue City resided the activities of this cult. Human sacrifices of the disappeared within satanic rituals, all to keep the looming darkness at bay. It was said that residents could sometimes hear the Order of the Keepers chanting from beneath the city, in the secret chamber where Pack-a-Punch resides. Of course, the police had been bribed into not investigating the goings-on from beneath and across the corners of the city. Well, either that, or they were simply too scared to draw unwanted attention from darker places. With all these unsavoury happenings occurring, the reporter sends a telegram back to Mr. Rapt, expressing his wariness and unease about the whole situation. From the busy city centre, to the quiet shipyards, to the misty side alleys, there was a tension within the air across Morgue City. He couldn't quite place it, but he was becoming nervous. This was not an atmosphere of a healthy city. More was going on than what met the eye. He revealed everything he had uncovered about Morgue City thus far, including the details and the contact numbers of the 4 individuals he was sent to investigate. However, the reporter also began to question why Mr. Rapt had tasked him with all these unusual quests and missions that he had. Tracking down ancient artifacts in the South Pacific, whilst finding strange meteor rocks and samples of Elements 115 from the Tunguska site in Russia. He couldn't help but sense that perhaps Mr. Rapt knew more than what he was letting the reporter in on. The final thing ever heard from the reporter was how he was looking forward to Mr. Rapt finally arriving in Morgue City. Sometime later, Mr. Rapt arrives in Morgue City with all the information the reporter had gathered for him about the 4 individuals. Nero Blackstone was a magician, performing across many venues throughout the city and, when not performing, researched into dark and paranormal forces to master for new magic tricks, unlike those of any other magician across Morgue City. More importantly, Nero had been experiencing reoccurring dreams in which he saw a mysterious shadow man, perhaps because of his research and tampering with darker forces. Nero had also recently encountered issues regarding his unfaithful wife, who had signed fraudulent loan documents under Nero's name. Mr. Rapt posed as a bank rep and pressured Nero's lawyer into hurrying the repayment. Meanwhile, Jack Vincent's career as a police officer was under threat following a probe involving bribes and corruption by Internal Affairs. One of Jack's close colleagues was vigorously interviewed by Mr. Rapt, posing as a higher-up about Vincent's alleged corruption. The partner refused to give any details, largely because he didn't know any. He too expressed wariness about the feeling of tension and the unknown surrounding Morgue City. On the other side of town, Mr. Rapt, posing as a film director, was looking to cast a female lead in his new picture. Jessica Rose was eyed as being the ideal fit, although her producer was skeptical about the idea. Finally, Morgue City's underground boxing scene found Floyd Campbell having knocked out his semi-final opponent, placing his team in the final. Mr. Rapt, disguised as a journalist, interviews Floyd's promoter, asking why Floyd had suddenly been pinned to contest in the final, rather than the more seasoned and professional boxer in Floyd's team. Mr. Rapt suspected that the promoter was using Floyd to keep his best boxer away from an opponent who could stand a chance at defeating the promoter's main moneymaker, although the promoter denied all such claims. Thus begins Morgue City's intro cutscene on January 15th of an unspecified year in the early 1940s. During the cinematic, each of the 4 characters kills someone. Nero deliberately kills his wife during a botched magic trick. Floyd conceals knuckle dusters under his boxing gloves and kills his opponents during the title fight. Jackie Vincent kills an unknown criminal after receiving a bribe, whilst Jessica Rose kills a photographer who had snapped some illicit pictures of her. Shortly after, the 4 are transported into an alternate orientation of Morgue City, where the city's inhabitants are all zombies infected from the previous 115 meteor shower. This is where the game begins, on Shadows of Evil. As a result of their actions, the 4 are once again contacted by Mr. Rapt, who reveals himself to be the Shadow Man. The Shadow Man is the right-hand man of the ultimate overlords who control the Apothecans. The Shadow Man, who is a satanic cultist, reveals that he is responsible for teleporting the 4 into this hellish dimension. He explains that they are all cursed by a mark on their left hands due to the ultimate sin they had all committed: murder, with the only way to remove the curse being to each perform a satanic ritual on a sacrifice of their choice. The Shadow Man informs the characters that he had been watching their every move, taking note of all their misdeeds committed across Morgue City. To repent for these sins, the Shadow Man instructs them to firstly use the Beast Mode to locate the Summoning Key. The Summoning Key is an interdimensional artifact which was used to create all the different dimensions, and can also form bridges between different dimensions to allow interdimensional travel, thus being an invaluable artifact needed by both the Apothecans and the Keepers. The Beast Mode is a portal which temporarily allows the user to become a tentacled Apothecan, enabling them to harness a limited amount of Apothecan power whilst active. Realising what the Shadow Man is trying to achieve, The Keepers rush into the dimension and desperately try to stop the 4 characters from blindingly opening a gateway to the Dark Ether by carrying out the sacrificial rituals, each resulting in the creation of a gateworm, a key to the Dark Ether. However, under their panic and confusion at the sight of zombies and Keepers, the Shadow Man fools the characters into thinking the Keepers are actually the enemy and therefore must be destroyed at all costs, explaining why the characters are killing the good guys every time a ritual is performed in Shadows of Evil. However, unbeknownst to the 4 characters, the Shadow Man had tricked them twice over. He had also misled the characters into believing that each of their closest associates had been disloyal in some form. For Nero, it was that his lawyer failed to prove his wife's fraudulence in the loan agreements. On Jessica's side, it was that her lawyer had turned down an offer for her to star on Broadway. For Floyd, it was that his promoter hadn't organised his fight in the final, and for Jack, it was that his partner had snitched him up to internal affairs. This caused the characters to hold a grudge against these people and thus choose them as the sacrifice in their rituals. As each ritual was carried out, the chosen sacrifices are snatched from their rightful position within space and time, and thrust into this hellish orientation of Morgue City. They scream in panic and confusion as they are entrapped within a force above the ritual sites, until they are ultimately slaughtered to the overlords. The rituals act as the bridge between the Shadows of Evil dimension and the Dark Ether. Upon the completion of each ritual and retrieving all 4 gateworms, the Shadow Man commands the 4 to carry out the final ritual by the Pack-a-Punch machine, consolidating the energy of the gateworms to open a portal to the Dark Ether. That's done, the Shadow Man reveals his true intentions to the 4 and thanks them for their blind service to the Apothicon overlords. The Apothicons run rampage across the dimension, fusing the city to become a tinted, satanic red colour, whilst the giant, kraken-like Apothicon descends upon Morgue City. The characters realise they had been fooled all along by the Shadow Man. He had misled them into thinking they were all in hell, thus leading them to blindingly follow the Shadow Man's own personal agenda, out of their inner fear of being stuck in hell forever. Nero's lawyer had managed to prove his wife's fraudulence. Jessica's producer had signed her a deal on Broadway. Floyd's promoter had organised him the title shot, and Jack's partner hadn't snitched him up to internal affairs. Knowing they had all been tricked into sacrificing their closest friends, the 4 set out to get revenge on the Shadow Man and destroy the plans for an Apothicon apocalypse. At this point, the Keepers know it's too late to stop the Apothicons from escaping the Dark Ether. However, seeing how the 4 characters had intended to enact revenge upon the Shadow Man, the Keepers realise they can limit the damage the Apothicons could cause by assisting the 4 in their quest to take out the Shadow Man and free the city from the Apothicons. From here on out, the Keepers no longer attack the characters. Upon further exploration of this twisted orientation of their city, Nero comes across the Cthulhu statues, which he had previously encountered in his research. Cthulhu was a mythical, tentacle-bearing creature, first described in a publication by H.P. Lovecraft in 1928. The creature resembles a giant undersea octopus, close to the look of the Apothicons, such as the Magwas, the Beast Mode, the Shadow Man's demonic head, and the giant Apothicon, currently over Morgue City. According to Lovecraft's novel, Cthulhu is a constant, subconscious cause of anxiety to humankind, and was said to have destroyed the world at some point in the future, perhaps indeed being what the Apothicons represent, as they did appear to be a subconscious level of fear to the deceased residents of Morgue City, clearly also trying to destroy the world. In addition to Cthulhu, another character is described by Lovecraft, this character taking the name of Nyarlathotep, better known as the Shadow Man. Nyarlathotep was labelled as the Crawling Chaos, or sometimes as a dark outer god within Cthulhu mythos. Nyarlathotep was said to be particularly dangerous because he could choose to take the identical form of a human being, meaning it was impossible to distinguish this dark entity from regular humans. However, Nyarlathotep's natural form resembled a human torso with a demonic, tentacled head, just as the Shadow Man has in his natural form. A specific trait shown by Nyarlathotep was the ability to manipulate others into following his commands, a trait also evidently displayed by the Shadow Man. It's clear from where Treyarch found their inspirations for the antagonists within the storyline. Anyway, further exploration revealed to Nero the Apothecan's servant, a weapon capable of killing its victims by sucking them into a black hole, but could also be used as a wormhole to teleport objects to other dimensions, similar to how the Gersh device works. In addition, he comes across another dangerous Apothecan weapon within the Mystery Rocks, known as the Little Arnies. Although he kept quiet about it, in view of the others, Nero secretly enjoyed the Apothecan takeover of Morgue City. He was an admirer of dark entities, as shown by his continuous research into such forces for magic tricks. He looked upon the characters, including himself, as nothing more than unintelligent and consciously de-elevated fools for allowing the Shadow Man to manipulate them so easily into opening a gateway to the Dark Ether. Nevertheless, it was done now. What mattered was their future actions. Despite kinda liking the new world, Nero knew he could not side with the Apothecans, as the other characters would surely kill him if he enacted such a betrayal. Therefore, he had no choice but to side with Rose, Vincent and Campbell, as they sought to see retribution against the Shadow Man. The first step was to secure the Keeper's sword located underground in Morgue City, which required the tram network to find several Keeper runes hidden in higher buildings throughout the city. These symbols are part of the Keeper language, also used to name many of the wonder weapons throughout Black Ops 3 Zombies, whilst being the language spoken in the mysterious chantings sometimes heard throughout Shadows of Evil. After doing so, the Keepers instruct Nero, Jack, Jessica and Floyd to each carry out 4 more rituals to power their sword. Upon doing so, the characters find the Kronorium, an invaluable artifact to be explained later, then locate a summoning altar to begin their attack on the Shadow Man. Next, they take the upgraded swords and hand them to the Keepers, who use the swords to destroy the Shadow Man's protective force field, leaving him vulnerable to damage from the characters' bullets. The characters neutralize the Shadow Man by entrapping him within the summoning key. And finally, with the help of the Keepers, the characters use the Beast Mode portals to kill the giant Cthulhu-like Apothecan over Morgue City, signalling the end of the Apothecan's temporal takeover of the city. A Keeper stands ready to hand the summoning key back to the characters.
I'm so sorry. I really don't have time to explain. I have a universe to set right. Thank you, and goodbye.
Richtofen quickly emerges from a portal, stealing the summoning key before declaring he needs it to save the universe. He hastily disappears back into the portal, which subsequently closes off. World saved and happy ending, right? Well, it's not quite as simple as that. Below the city, in the metro station, hides a message left by Dr. Maxis, stating that this entire dimension and its inhabitants will be forever lost as he attempts to deliver an end to the zombie nightmare which had befallen the world for so long. After all that, the Shadows of Evil characters were indeed going to be stuck within the Shadows of Evil dimension forever. Although maybe one more thing that should be mentioned is the presence of a hidden cipher within the boxing gym, reading "Primis will fail," perhaps foreshadowing that despite the fruits of our characters' labour, they are predetermined to fail, implying that it may simply not be possible to repair the universe. After the events of Origins, Richtofen teleports to the Ether, also known as Agartha, they are the same thing, where the Origins ending cutscene takes place. In that cutscene, Samantha and Eddie play with toys in the house, before a siren is heard. Whenever a siren is heard, it means that someone new is coming to the house. The house is an eternal safe haven within the Ether, the highest dimension, free from apothecary corruption and vulnerability from the Dark Ether, also known as the lowest dimension. Richtofen spends some time at the house, where he and Maxis study the concept of alternate timelines/universes. Maxis had been given a new torso after he arrived as a drone from Origins. During Maxis and Richtofen's research, they figure out the central complication that the multiverse has caused an interconnected, endless time loop of events to form, and as such, this time cycle needs to be broken to free the characters from their eternal entrapment within the cycle, of which Samantha had warned them about in Origins. After some time, Maxis and Richtofen come up with a plan to break the cycle. This plan involves travelling across universes to collect each of the 4 characters' souls within the summoning key, so that they can be transferred to an immortal child version of themselves in the house. Afterwards, the teleporter will be destroyed so that each of the other universes and dimensions are permanently sealed off from the ether, with the presence of the children preventing the characters' souls from also being erased from existence. Each character's soul must be collected from a specific universe at a specific moment in time for the plan to be successful. The 4 characters from Origins, also called the 2.0 characters, won't be affected by the deaths of their older selves due to the portal to the ether that they opened in Origins, leading to the house. Although Maxis warns this gateway could close at any time, ultimately sealing the team's fate if they were not in the ether should this happen. They are known as the 2.0 characters because they are the actual versions of themselves from the central 2.0 universe, where everything is right, where there is no time cycle, and all events follow their natural orders. Every other version of Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen are all just duplicates from other universes, formed from the fracture of the 2.0 universe. Moreover, Maxis informs Richtofen that Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo must never be allowed to know that their older 1.0 versions of themselves will die through the completion of this plan, because the 3 may turn against Richtofen if they find out his true intentions are to meddle with history and put their very existences at risk should the gateway to the ether close itself prematurely. At some point during Richtofen's stay at the house, Dr. Maxis is contacted by another entity known as Dr. Monty. Dr. Monty briefly introduces himself, informing Maxis that Richtofen must travel across the multiverse to find a book of the highest knowledge called the Kronorium, which contains invaluable information about the apothecans, the keepers, the location and uses of the summoning key, interdimensional travel, and how element 115 was inducing temporal displacements across the universes, causing different universes to become artificially linked and intertwined through space-time, leading to many inconsistencies and unusual occurrences, which will be described as they present themselves in each map. Maxis soon informs Richtofen of his new mission, then bids farewell to his close friend, as Richtofen steps inside of the basement's teleporter, and, despite having his grave concerns about the plan, endeavours on his quest to locate the Kronorium, the summoning key, and collects the souls of the 1.0 characters. And so, Richtofen begins his daring quest, travelling across many futures, many histories, many different universes. Eventually, he's able to track down the Kronorium. After spending some time trawling through the book for answers, uncovering much of the truth in the process, Richtofen discovers the summoning key is located inside the twisted dimension in which Shadows of Evil and Mold of the Dead take place, because Shadows of Evil and Mob of the Dead are in the same dimension, the 63rd dimension to be precise. Sometime prior to travelling to Morgue City, Richtofen had contacted the unnamed private reporter who had discovered the summoning key during his time exploring exotic islands in the South Pacific for Mr. Rapt, also known as the Shadow Man. Richtofen ordered the reporter to bring the summoning key to him, which the reporter agreed to do in a crate on the back of his truck. However, once Richtofen and the reporter rendezvoused in Morgue City, the reporter was acting strange, babbling incomprehensibly and waving a letter around, ordering Richtofen to stay away from his truck. When Richtofen approached the reporter's truck, the reporter attacked Richtofen, leaving Richtofen no choice but to stab the reporter in self-defense, killing him. However, when Richtofen tried to remove the summoning key from the back of the reporter's truck, he found that the crate had been sealed by dark apothecary magic, and so had no choice but to leave Morgue City and return later to collect the summoning key, which he evidently does so during the Shadows of Evil ending cutscene. However, what Richtofen didn't know was that the Shadow Man was inside the summoning key due to the actions of the 4 Shadows of Evil characters. Anyway, after Richtofen had successfully retrieved the summoning key, completing phase 2, it was time for him to enact the most difficult part of his plan: collecting the souls of the World at War / Black Ops versions of Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen, also known as the 1.0 characters. Meanwhile at the Giant, the 2.0 versions of Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo confront Richtofen 1.0 just after he had teleported the 1.0 versions of Dr. Maxis, Samantha and Fluffy. The 3 Origins characters order Richtofen 1.0 to awaken the test subjects, in other words, the 1.0 Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo, as part of a predetermined plan that had to be set in motion to ensure events followed their natural order. After Origins, Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo 2.0 had also been travelling across the universes, attempting to find Richtofen 2.0 after he disappeared to the ether. Throughout their travels hunting for the German, they too had seen many visions of the past and the future, something they had all become immensely startled by, for they did not have the understanding Richtofen had about the concept of the multiverse. Anyway, Richtofen 1.0 refuses to awaken the test subjects, and instead proceeds to open the teleporter, revealing Richtofen 2.0, who had just returned from Morgue City with the summoning key. Richtofen 2.0 suddenly shoots Richtofen 1.0 in the head, killing him instantly, to achieve a disruption to this timeline's events. In other words, to rewrite history. Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo show disgust towards Richtofen for ruining their plan, but Richtofen defends his actions by stating that what he is doing will better their tomorrow. Little did they know about Richtofen's plan made with Maxis, involving the killing of their 1.0 selves to collect their souls. Whilst Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo gear up to fight against the incoming zombies, Richtofen kneels beside the corpse of his older self, holding the summoning key close to it, causing Richtofen 1.0's soul to be transferred from his lifeless body and into the summoning key. Although this was supposed to be done in secret, Dempsey caught a glimpse of the process. This is where the game begins on the Giant, an alternate iteration of the Rees in which the 1,000-foot German combat robots were originally created. The time period in which the Giant takes place is 1945, during the late stages of World War II. Realising the potential consequences of what he had just done, Richtofen feels panic, anxiousness and uncertainty about what the future now holds. The uncontrollable domino effect of rewriting history was too great to contemplate. His mental state begins to show signs of confusion and collapse, but he knows that he cannot give in now. It's beyond the point of no return. The light at the end of the tunnel is faint, but visible. As the hordes of zombies slowly make their way into the facility, Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo pressure Richtofen with questions as to where he had been for the past 2 years, why he had killed his older self, and, from Dempsey specifically, why he had seen Richtofen hold a strange object next to the body of his 1.0 self. However, Richtofen stays true to the plan made with his trusted ally Maxis, and refuses to give any straight answers to the three, only saying that they could never understand the truth, and to just trust him, for it would all work out in the end if they did, as a gentle snow began to fall upon the abandoned facility. They were temporarily secure now. They could hold the undead off for a while, using the machines within the giants, whilst they pulled themselves together, got their bearings, and figured out their next moves. Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo continued to press Richtofen with inquiries, for they were more wary and disorientated than ever. They barely knew each other, let alone all this talk of alternate realities and time cycles. Richtofen knew he could only give vague answers in fear of giving away his plan, but as Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo meandered through the lost, moonlight-illuminated corridors of the giant, there was an overwhelming sense of unease that a coming storm was on the horizon. Takeo pondered to himself as to why he had been having visions of the Shadow Man, although he daren't ask the others if they had also seen him, for he feared the inevitable answer they would all give. Every so often, Takeo swore he could hear the Shadow Man whispering to him from the darkest corners of the facility. He feared these happenings were an omen for a dark future. Through further exploration of the giants, Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo find several radio transmissions made by other versions of themselves in different universes. The purpose of these messages was to instruct the three, should their plan fail, as it indeed did, and to help them avoid subsequent dangerous mistakes made by these other universal versions. Dempsey's recording states that the team need to activate a beacon to allow Maxis 2.0 currently in the ether to find them, since their frequent jumping to other dimensions had caused them to become lost somewhere deep within space and time. However, he warns the 2.0 characters to avoid getting too close to the radioactive beacon, as this version of Dempsey did so, and thus all his hair fell out. Nikolai's recording was aimed at reassuring his 2.0 self, despite the mission having failed. However, he accidentally mentions that this version of the characters had also been travelling across universes, and during this time, Nikolai had killed 3 other versions of Richtofen, thus potentially giving away Richtofen's true intentions to kill the 1.0 characters. This version of Nikolai tells Nikolai 2.0 to inform Richtofen 2.0 that the first time having to kill another version of himself is always the hardest. However, before the recording ends, this version of Nikolai realises that the 2.0 characters cannot know their 1.0 selves will be killed, and as such, quickly cuts off the recording by telling his 2.0 self to forget what he had just said about killing the Richtofens. Meanwhile, Takeo's message states that this other universal version of Takeo was also having visions of the Shadow Man and was wary of what this meant for their futures, or perhaps their lack thereof. Rather than just one message recorded by this other universal version of himself, Richtofen 2.0 found a series of recordings from several different versions of Dr. Maxis across multiple universes, including the 2.0 Maxis currently in the house. Maxis 2.0 has left 3 messages directly for Richtofen. He thanks Richtofen for sacrificing another side of himself, trying to calm his friend's doubts and fears. He tells Richtofen that this path is how the universe will be saved, despite the costs inherent to it. He explains to Richtofen that the two are still able to communicate across the rift to the ether, for it had not yet closed itself, and as such, informs Richtofen to activate the interdimensional beacon located on site to enable Maxis to find the 2.0 team's exact whereabouts and extracts them from the giant. He does, however, also leave a reminder to Richtofen that the 1.0 characters must never be allowed to awaken, due to the inevitable damage and destruction they would all cause on an already shattered universe. The ultimate sacrifice was to be enacted by the 2.0 characters when the time was right. Due to Elements 115 induced temporal displacement, the remaining recordings found in the Giant are each from different points in space and time, also being across multiple universes. In these messages, Maxis doesn't appear to be addressing anyone directly. In the first message, Maxis simply states that the child must be protected at all costs, which is obviously referring to the house in the ether, and how it needs to be protected from the millions of other universes, each harbouring gateways for the apothecans to access the ether and corrupt the house. In the second, Maxis has had Samantha return to him after the events of Origins, but she isn't the same as before. She doesn't speak much, and when she does, it's only to call out for the Shadow Man, showing how her time spent in control of the zombies in the ether had cast her under the influence of the apothecans. The third recording appears to be from the 2.0 Maxis, but sometime in the future, after they apparently have defeated the apothecans. He says the children have left the house, and that the sirens haven't sounded in months, causing him to believe his plan to save the world was indeed successful. However, he was still wary at what costs by which they had defeated the apothecans. The final two radio recordings seem to be by Dr. Maxis 2.0 before the zombie outbreak occurs in Origins, as he discusses his theories about how they may need to manipulate the energy fields to achieve interdimensional travel. However, the first of these two recordings appears to be from an alternate universe in which Dr. Maxis is actually aware that Samantha is his daughter, and that she is trapped within Agartha, as he mentions that he hopes Group 935's research will be able to uncover the dimensional gateway to Agartha in order to find Samantha. The final recording found in the Giant seems to be from the 1.0 version of Maxis in the World at War and Black Ops Zombies timeline, because he discusses how early teleportation tests at the new site, Dries, had resulted in the test subjects disappearing from the test chamber but not reappearing at the mainframe. He states that Richtofen had theorised that the test subjects were being transported not through space, but through time instead. However, Dr. Maxis refused to buy into what, at the time, seems like such a crazy theory, and thus was wary that Richtofen was beginning to lose his mind. It's difficult to be certain on exactly when and where each of those 11 messages were recorded, due to the damage Element 115 had inflicted upon the space-time continuum, and thus, some or perhaps all of those messages may be from other universes, in either the past or the future. Nevertheless, the 2.0 characters continue to fight the undead through the corridors and labs of the Giant, as Element 115 causes their personalities and memories to slowly begin merging with those of their 1.0 selves in World at War and Black Ops, hence why their quotes are very similar to those from the original Dries map. The team finds the flytrap and activate the dimensional beacon, allowing Maxis 2.0 to locate precisely when and where they are in space-time to secure their extraction from the facility. The game ends on the Giant as Maxis 2.0 helps the crew build a giant robot from salvaged parts across the facility, before destroying the site as the team leave, apprehensive about what the future now held. A final word before moving on is that Element 115's temporal displacement is also responsible for the Mob of the Dead escape plane being on the roof of Lab C in the Giants. After crafting a combat robot from spare parts found across the Giant, the 2.0 team continue their way through the now ever-altering and ever-changing events of this universe, as part of Richtofen's quest to break the cycle and repair the central universe. Sometime later, they track down a German supply truck containing the 1.0 version of tank Dempsey, following it across the German border and into Austria, headed towards the Eagle's Nest, also known as der Eisendrache. However, before they could arrive at the mountaintop castle, a German soldier from inside the truck fires a Panzerschreck at the team's robot, causing it to come crashing down to the ground and explode. Thankfully, Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen all escape from the wreckage unharmed, but now have no choice but to continue the remainder of the way to the Eagle's Nest on foot, knowing the hardships they endure now will set the foundations for a better future. As the team arrive and cautiously make their way through the nearby town of Werfen, they discover an array of German V2 missiles primed and ready to launch, perhaps as a failsafe if the fortress was to fall. Or maybe, to deliver the nuclear weapons the Third Reich was developing towards the end of the war, and were due to complete ready for use at some point during 1946. The crew come across a gondola station and take a gondola up to the Eagle's Nest in search of Dempsey's 1.0 self. However, just as they depart from the gondola atop the mountain, a V2 rocket is launched high into the stratosphere en route to the moon, containing Dempsey's cryogenically frozen 1.0 body. This is where the game begins on the Eisendrache, the Iron Dragon in German, also known as Griffin Castle, the Eagle's Nest, or Hohenwerfen Castle in real life, towering above the Salzach Valley. This was a Group 935 operated, mountaintop fortress rife with secrets and newly discovered deposits of Element 115, but now overrun by the undead. As with the Giant, the team search the castle and come across several radio recordings, this time by Dr. Groff at Griffin Station, on the moon. In the first recording, Dr. Groff discusses how Division 9, Group 935's Japanese counterparts in the Pacific, who operated the Kronorium research facility, had been making progress in their weapons research and development projects, although Groff confessed to having his doubts about Division 9's more ambitious weapons designs, involving Element 115. Groff also casts a light on Group 935's master plan, which we know from so long ago yet now comes so close as our heroes make their way through space-time, involving the controlled deployment of domesticated zombies against Germany's enemies, notably on the Eastern Front against the USSR, which Groff hoped would break the military stalemate in Germany's favour. Group 935 had also contracted Division 9 with resurrecting keepers for Group 935, in addition to 935's own zombie creation projects. Division 9's newest facility, located on the Island of Despair, was created after their research team made significant progress from initial testing within the Kronorium facility. Preliminary testing at Division 9's newest outpost was underway. In the second recording, Dr. Groff can be heard triumphantly declaring to a cheering crowd of 935 members that their discovery of Element 115 and the subsequent science uncovered had advanced their weapons program beyond their wildest of expectations. Groff states that the creation of Group 935's moonbase has proved that the group could literally do anything. However, events take a darker turn during the third recording, when Groff claims that his team's constant exposure to the MPD could be corrupting and distorting their very cognitive processes. He explains how he recently had a dream about Dr. Maxis' daughter, Samantha, and although Samantha had been a frequent visitor to Griffin Castle, even having her own dormitory, Groff couldn't understand how she could possibly be on the moon, although he speculated Griffin Station's interrupted contact with the Eagle's Nest could be partly responsible for events taking a stranger twist. What he didn't know was that these dreams were distorted visions of the future, invoked by Element 115 and its disruptive properties. During the fourth, Groff explains how contact with Richtofen had been lost for over 2 weeks, which is due to Richtofen 2.0 having just killed Richtofen 1.0, leading Groff to fear the Richtofen he knew, the 1.0 version, had been killed due to Deriz falling to enemy forces. As such, Groff states that he was taking personal control of Group 935 operations, whilst postponing all further experiments involving the MPD until he could fully establish what exactly had happened to Richtofen and the remainder of Group 935 on Earth. He finally admits painfully that Operation SHIELD, the code's name for Groff and Richtofen's takeover of Group 935 from Maxis, was now unlikely to succeed as they had originally planned. In the final recording, Groff states that, despite having postponed the MPD experiments, the 935 team at Griffin Station had begun to observe totally new and unusual effects coming from the pyramid. Comms interference, power outages, and other EMP-style effects were becoming commonplace. More seriously, perimeter guards had begun to hear voices emanating from the MPD, although external recordings had not picked up any such voices. Several individuals reported repeatedly hearing the two phrases, "I must go to her, the loop must be closed," allegedly being spoken by Dr. Maxis. Unbeknownst to Groff, the scientists were actually hearing the voice of Maxis from the 2.0 universe in Origins, just before his drone ascends to the ether, being heard in the Eisendrache universe due to Element 115. Before ending the final recording from the Eisendrache, Groff states that the team have placed emergency survival suits throughout the moon base, explaining how there were PES suits on the moon map. In addition to the radio recordings, other sources indicate that Group 935 had in fact discovered the existence of the Keepers, and how they could travel between dimensions without the use of teleporters. Also, it's learnt that Richtofen 1.0's Mexican subject, whom he killed, actually led Richtofen to unlock the secret he needed to begin creating the Third Reich's much desired undead army. A projector in the bedroom sector of the castle displays how Group 935 were experimenting on captured Keepers, explaining how they discovered the forces of the Vril. In Samantha's bedroom, we find a drawing of a Keeper emerging from a portal, motioning for Samantha to follow him back into the portal, showing how Samantha was contacted by the Keepers, thus explaining how Samantha ended up within Agartha in the first place. Other drawings show pictures of dragons with Samantha and her dog, Fluffy, riding on the back, with the words, "Daddy said dragons existed long ago," inscribed below. Maybe when Samantha was taken to Agartha by the Keepers and gained control of the Vril, she used this power to morph dragons into reality, as she seemed to be quite fond of these magical creatures. Perhaps this is how we rationalise dragons morphing through universes into the walls of the Eisendrache, whilst also featuring in other future levels. Another source is found, this one written by the Mexican test subject. His name is Pablo Marinus. He discusses how Group 935 had kept him locked away in a prison cell within the castle, every so often pumping him full of a blue liquid called divinium, also known as unum pensum, also known as Element 115. The 115 injections caused him to experience visions which he could have sworn were real. In his visions, he is a brave knight returning from an ancient battle described similar to that of the Crusades, in which he fought demonic, tentacled apothecans such as Maguas, who were trying to destroy civilization. At one particular point during the battle, Pablo is caught in the tentacles of a Magua, but is suddenly saved from certain death by Primis, wielding the 4 elemental staffs. Pablo states the Keepers were also fighting on his side against the apothecans. What unnerved him though, was that the Black Sun symbols on the Keepers' tunics from his visions were identical to the Black Sun symbols engraved into stones which he had spotted across Griffin Castle, leading him to fear these visions may be more than just nightmares. Little did he know that what he was visioning were historical events from the main 2.0 universe. However, the only thing Pablo Marinus wanted was to end his eternal nightmare within the hands of Group 935. In his second message, Pablo states that, in his visions, he is actually a king, the Wolf King. However, he praises Primis, who, in his words, were the bravest warriors he had ever seen. Together, along with the help of the Keepers, Marinus and Primis defeat the Apothecans and their undead army, banishing them to the Dark Ether. The last thing Primis told Pablo was to build his castle, the castle, in a specific location in what's now known as Verfen. The 4 paintings required to be activated to unlock the wolf bow show further detail as to what's happened to Pablo, but only within this specific universe in which the Eisendrache takes place. Pablo and his 2 beloved pet wolves are all killed in the civil war by the Apothecans. Upon finding the painting, Richtofen 2.0 comments that he had previously seen this painting when he picked up the summoning key during his journey to collect the artifact from the Shadows of Evil characters. He also comments that, in this universe, battling the Apothecans only ever ends in one outcome: death, highlighting how events are different between the many universes. When Group 935 took control of Griffin Castle, the king's remains were scattered to the 4 winds. Upon retrieving the wolf's skull and assembling its skeleton, we see the ghost of one of the king's wolves, who wanders the castle, digging up the remains of the king. Once Pablo's body is reassembled and properly buried within his tomb, the wolf ghost is finally able to rest in peace. Several monuments of Primis can also be seen throughout the castle's labyrinth of underground tunnels, obviously having been created by Pablo Marinus and his men sometime after building the castle. Upon closer look, murals of Primis can be seen everywhere. From giant statues in Origins, and the drawing of Primis in Origins, to large wall carvings within the secret chamber of Shadows of Evil, and now here in Griffin Castle. After the 2.0 team arrive at the Eisendrache, Groff 1.0 at Griffin Station spots them on the security feeds and assumes it's the 1.0 crew. When asked to clarify, Richtofen 2.0 tells Groff that he had returned from the Giant with Maxis and Samantha having already been dealt with, to prevent Groff from becoming suspicious. At first, this worked, but as the team progressed through the Eisendrache and unlock its secrets, for example, Pack-a-Punch and the 4 ancient bows, Groff becomes concerned that Richtofen is no longer on his side. The team continue to take control of key systems and weapons harboured into Eisendrache, confirming Groff's worst fears. As such, Groff activates emergency protection systems within Griffin Castle to prevent Richtofen from gaining access to Dempsey 1.0, as well as other important functions of the castle. However, the 2.0 crew were already working around Groff's defense mechanisms to gain access to Dempsey 1.0. They first used the teleporter in Griffin Castle to travel back to some point in time when Dr. Groff was working at the castle. During this stage, we hear Richtofen 1.0 urgently radio Groff to inform him that Dr. Maxis' teleporter experiments at Deriz were almost certain to succeed, and as such, Groff should accelerate their experiments with the NPD to ensure the breakaway faction of 935 scientists stay ahead of Maxis' team at Deriz and other Group 935 installations. However, Groff brushes aside Richtofen's concerns by stating that their progress made at the moon base has already sped up their plans. Groff also states that he had no doubt their discovery of the NPD would turn the tide of World War II in Germany's favour, if the device could be weaponized. After travelling back to the present, the 2.0 team returned to Groff's safe by the teleporter and retrieved the V2 rocket launch codes for the array of missiles situated around the castle, as well as a pair of control conduits for the castle's death ray device. The crew reconfigure the death ray with their new conduits, which subsequently blasts the V2 missile containing Dempsey's test subject heading for the moon, sending Dempsey 1.0 crashing back down to Griffin Castle in the top section of the rocket. However, Groff's defense mechanisms are still active, meaning the crew can't access Dempsey 1.0 just yet. As well as Dempsey 1.0, the wreckage brought down the vril generator, which was used to gain Richtofen 1.0 access to the MPD back during Moon. With the vril generator, the 2.0 team returned to the past to collect a ceramic summoning plate, similar to the ones used under D Glock, then once again returned to the present. With that done, they used the vril generator to spawn a ghostly looking keeper which required zombie souls. After collecting enough zombie souls, the keeper develops into a full being before teleporting to the moon. Meanwhile, Dr. Groff and the rest of the 935 team on the moon detects the keeper arriving and rush to protect the MPD. But it's too late, for the MPD is teleported from the moon to the Eisendrache, which replaces the smaller pyramid already in the castle. However, during this process, the keeper becomes corrupted by Elements 115, and as such, turns against the 2.0 characters. At this point, Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen are teleported to the Dark Ether to battle the corrupted keeper, as zombies, hellhounds, panzer soldats, undead skeletons and other forces of the Apothecans attempt to kill the four, forming the ultimate boss battle. Eventually, having killed the corrupted keeper, the 2.0 characters return to the castle, retrieving the summoning key from the MPD. They place the summoning key aboard a computer terminal atop the castle, initiating a mass launch of the V2 rockets from Werfen, each aimed at the moon. Groff hastily detects the launch on Griffin Station systems, realizing just what exactly is about to happen. In the final few moments of his life, Groff curses Richtofen, still believing that he is the 1.0 ally he once knew, accuses him of being an enemy spy and imposter, roaring down his radio that Richtofen's betrayal will change nothing, that Group 935 will still triumph. As the hourglass of Groff's life trickles down to the final grains, the scientist who once relished an exploration for the greater good of humanity came to terms with how greed, insanity, and obsessions for the advancement of Nazi weaponry had obliviated his mind to the evils and unprecedented destruction spawned from his research. In the slowed moment of the V2s colliding into the moon, Groff realizes the grave errors of his ways. This crazed fanatic was not the Dr. Groff who had entered Group 935 in utter despair of witnessing the loss of his 9-month-old daughter to an incurable disease within the child's heart, enrolling himself into Group 935 through a sense of justice, with the sole intention to help others, to invent machines and medicines, to save lives, to bear happiness of which he had been so cruelly deprived. Griffin Station and the final surviving remnants of Group 935 are eradicated, leaving the Earth's only moon as little more than millions of fragments of space debris. With the moon destroyed, the protective shields surrounding Dempsey 1.0's cryo chamber are deactivated, leaving him to the mercy of the 2.0 characters. Knowing in his heart that he could not hold it back any longer, Richtofen regretfully informs Dempsey that his older self will depart from life, as the crew gather around Dempsey 1.0 to say goodbye for the last time.
He's still alive.
I fucking hope so.
This subject will one day wreak havoc across the entire universe. He cannot be allowed to live.
This wasn't how it was supposed to go. We were supposed to secure the package and be in and out clean. Instead, the whole thing's been one disaster after another. I should never have trusted you, Richtofen. Never!
You should trust me, Dempsey. You all should. This artifact has the power to contain and preserve the subject's soul. Your soul. But it can only be done after the moment of death, just as you saw me do to my other self. It is the only way.
Wait! If someone's gotta take him out to save the universe, then it should be me that does it. Good to see you, Tank.
It was hard for Dempsey to accept his older self will now never be, but it was consolation knowing his sacrifice will not go in vain if Richtofen's plan is successful. Nikolai and Takeo, on the other hand, became wary as to what Dempsey 1.0's death would mean for the future of their older selves. Richtofen, however, was ever so slightly relieved that despite the fierce resistance they had encountered in Griffin Castle from the Apothecans and from Dr. Groff, he had still managed to secure the second soul in the summoning key. His plan was working. Having completed their mission at the Eisendrache, the 2.0 team teleports across the multiverse before arriving somewhere around the South Pacific in a different universe to the universe in which the Giant and the Eisendrache had taken place. They had arrived at the Island of Despair, also known as Zetsubou no Shima, on the jungle-dominated island of Pohnpei, within what's now known as the Federated States of Micronesia. Within this mountainous, volcanic island, Division 9 had established their main research and weapons development core, concealed by the thick jungle and surrounding swamps. At the heart of the Japanese base was a central underground bunker in which the most brutal and horrific biological experiments took place, far more terrible than anything Group 935 had ever devised. Their wicked research brought them results though, in the form of new wonder weapons, including the KT-4 and the Masamune. Among Division 9's more progressive endeavours was their attempts at harnessing the Vril via the control over Nansapwe's skull, an ancient and all-powerful ancestor of the Keepers, whose skull was uncovered during the construction of the site. But, as we know all too well, meddling with dark forces never ends well for those who seek to meddle with them. The Division's creation was overseen by the Emperor, who hoped the group would be able to produce new superweapons to alter the course of the Pacific War against the US. As such, word on the streets quickly made its way back to Germany and Group 935 about Division 9's activities, and thus the two groups became close partners in their common quest to change the war in favour of the Axis powers. Shortly after they had set up the island base, Division 9 began experiencing power fluctuations across the facility. As these occurred, staff began to hear voices emanating from the walls, from a boy and a girl sobbing whilst the man cried out for them to close the windows. They were hearing just one of the many alternate universes, except in this one, the Apothecans are undefeated and thus wreak havoc upon the ether. Due to Element 115's displacement, members of Division 9 were hearing these happenings from other universes, just as Group 935 had from the recording logs of their Eisendrache. Many of the personnel working in Division 9's new island facility couldn't help but feel that something was off about the island. A while after the construction of the island station was completed, the Emperor decided to reduce the rate at which supplies were delivered to the island facility, as he was beginning to lose faith in anything worthwhile coming from Division 9's research. This caused Division 9 to conserve power within the facility, as supply drops now came once every 2 months rather than every month. Sometime later, a meteor crashed in the proximity of the island, which hastily sped up Division 9's progress, leading to the creation of the KT-4 and other scientific advances. However, it wasn't only Germany who were gathering air of Division 9's existence. Unbeknownst to Japan, the US were also well aware of Division 9's experiments. Fearing Division 9 had the potential to unleash unthinkable havoc upon the US Pacific campaign if these new weapons were deployed, the US launched a huge bombing raid against the secret island facility, with the aim of completely eradicating Division 9's research to prevent these superweapons from being moved into mass production. Although the airstrike did destroy some parts of the base, most of the labs were undamaged, largely due to the presence of Japanese Zero fighters and a heavy anti-air battery across the island, resulting in a significant portion of the American squadron being shot down, as we can see from the numerous aircraft wreckages across the map. However, despite the failed air assault, it wasn't only the Americans who were becoming wary of Division 9's progress. Sometime prior to the bombing raid, the Emperor himself had sent in Takeo 1.0 to monitor and report back on any suspected disloyalties from the group. However, soon after arriving, Division 9 became hostile towards Takeo, restricting him from almost every area of research, whilst also being forced to surrender his weapons for the duration of his inspection. What surprised Takeo was that the commander of the island's lab had been ordered by the Emperor to hinder Takeo's inspection. As such, despite being an honourable servant of Japan, Takeo began to question the Emperor's orders. He reported back that he was becoming nervous about the extent as to which Group 935 has been influencing Division 9's activities. Over the previous few months, Group 935 had increased the number of officers stationed on the island sevenfold, leading Takeo to suspect that Division 9 were nothing more than a mere pawn being used by Group 935 to advance their own agenda. He also noted that Division 9's methods of research displayed extreme cruelty and suffering by both their human and animal test subjects, thus being completely unacceptable by his standards. Takeo continues to report that Division 9's increasing attention towards the dangerous element 115 is incomprehensibly risky, potentially threatening Japan's entire existence if direct intervention wasn't put in place immediately. Finally, Takeo proposes that the Emperor himself puts his foot down to Division 9's operations to make clear the direction and ramifications of their projects. Sometime later, Division 9 takes Takeo 1.0 prisoner deep within the facility, signalling the final acts of betrayal towards his inspection. Fast forward to the tail end of the American air attack upon the island. The 2.0 team teleports into this new universe, find a supply ship headed for the island, and board it as stowaways. However, they are soon discovered by the ship's crew and brought to the deck to be interrogated by the captain. He recognises Takeo 2.0, thinking it is the 1.0 version, and accuses him of being a traitor to Japan. The officer reveals the summoning key discovered below deck, and demands to know where they had found it. Although the 2.0 characters refuse to say, they do state that the summoning key has abilities beyond the officer's comprehension. Just as the captain orders the crew to throw the 2.0 characters overboard, Takeo loses his temper and attacks the captain, resulting in a fight breaking out between the crew and the 2.0 characters. The 2.0 characters recover the summoning key and destroy the ship, using a piece of debris to float the remainder of the way to the island. Upon arrival, our team realise they are in a distorted, twisted universe as planes dogfighting overhead warp in and out from other dimensions, all being caused by element 115. As per his plan, Richtofen proceeds to locate Takeo 1.0 as the 2.0 characters come to terms with the haunting screams from the lost souls crying out in pain from beyond, who were once left to suffer through Division 9's torturing experiments. It came clear, through the presence of zombies and all kinds of other monstrosities, that Division 9 were unable to contain the facility, and thus the inevitable also occurred here. As they progress further into the depths of the facility, they find horribly mutilated creatures including spiders, some big, some fucking huge, as well as thrashers which had been so terribly mutilated that it was no longer clear what they originally once were before Division 9 got a hold of them. As per usual, the characters are contacted by Dr. Maxis in the ether, the perfect world, contrasting so starkly to what evils harbour on this island. Maxis discusses how he had been experiencing memories of which he didn't think were his own, which is in fact the memories of his 1.0 self merging with those of his current 2.0 state. This is all being caused by element 115 induced temporal displacement. In the second, Maxis mentions how the mysterious Dr. Monty explained to him everything that was currently occurring, but was uncertain as to how Dr. Monty knew all of this. Nevertheless, Maxis stated that he had accepted Monty's help in their quest to break the cycle. Maxis brings up the fact that, a long time ago, Richtofen had sworn a promise to Maxis that he would follow Maxis' every order and instruction to undo the disastrous actions of their 1.0 selves which shaped the zombie apocalypse. So far, Richtofen had kept to his promise, but, regretfully, Maxis stated that there were certain truths he had kept from Richtofen, although he didn't specify what. More information about other aspects of the storyline can be learnt from several ciphers hidden across the island. In the first, an unknown scientist working at the Verrucht Asylum complains that Group 935 hadn't sent them a batch of test subjects from the Eagle's Nest. This was because the characters are rewriting history, resulting in the test subjects never arriving from Griffin Castle. He also complains that Group 935 had labelled their asylum as Verrucht, crazy in German, despite the scientists claiming the asylum to be just as important to their master zombie control project as any of their other facilities. Causing further concern to Group 935, more specifically to Maxis 1.0, was Richtofen 1.0's obsession with jumping between dimensions using their newly created teleporters. He writes that, at any point, the fabric of space-time could collapse if the proper level of element 115 was not maintained during the teleportation process. This would explain how the world is in such a disaster with different universes and temporal displacement. Perhaps it was just one specific botched use of the teleporter which caused the central universe to fracture into the millions of other spin-off universes. Furthermore, Maxis 1.0 also describes how memories from his 2.0 self had flooded his 1.0 mind after using the teleporter. Although Maxis 1.0 never knew a 2.0 version of himself ever existed, as he was never aware about the existence of the multiverse. In another cipher, we hear from Gersh, who couldn't tell how long he had been trapped within the dark ether after Yuri had teleported him there all those years ago, before he realises that he is actually in a city on fire next to a large river in his home, Stalingrad. A different cipher by another Soviet scientist states that this scientist had stolen several schematics and blueprints from Group 935 and was sending them back to Mother Russia for Soviet scientists to study them, as their western front against the German army was on the brink of collapse. The scientists hoped these plans would allow Soviet scientists to construct wonder weapons to push the German army back. Remember this, because it will explain things we shall see in the future. The final cipher takes the form of a telegram, stating that the plane carrying Brock and Gary to Shangri-La had suddenly encountered freak atmospheric events, causing it to crash, killing everyone on board including Brock and Gary. This reveals that, all along, Brock and Gary were funded and tasked by Group 935 to investigate the secret temple after the pair's research concluded the location of Shangri-La. However, their plane only crashes in this specific universe due to the 2.0 characters rewriting history, which causes a spiral-like chain reaction of altered events, which, in this case, leads to Brock and Gary being killed before they ever arrived at Shangri-La, at least in the Zetsubou no Shima universe. As soon as the 2.0 characters arrive on the island, they begin their quest to seek out Takeo 1.0 from the depths of Division 9's secret research core. After retrieving the skull of Nansapwe from an underground tomb, the 2.0 crew used the skull's force to uncover other secrets around the base. Within the tomb itself reside several murals on the tomb's walls which depict further backstory of Nansapwe and the Keeper's presence on the island. For thousands of years, the Keepers were worshipped as the great protectors of the universe by the native inhabitants of the island. However, once the Great Civil War arose between the Keepers and the Apothicons, the island's very existence was threatened by the Apothicons in the form of a huge swamp monster on the very edge of the island. Nansapwe sacrifices himself to the swamp monster to keep it at bay, saving the island and its inhabitants. Thus, when the 2.0 characters attempt to retrieve the skull in-game, Keepers emerge from portals to try to protect their master's skull. As the 2.0 team successfully remove the skull from its podium, they regretfully mark the ultimate death of their alliance with the Keepers. Although the two groups were similar in the sense that they were both fighting the Apothicons, they could no longer be considered allies. Using the skull of Nansapwe, the team uncover further sectors of the base, including an old, broken elevator shaft. With the KT-4, the crew finds a secret network of tunnels leading to a cave, inhabited by one of Division 9's failed spider experiments, leading to the poor creature being hundreds of times larger than Mother Nature created it to be. Upon defeating the mutated spider and retrieving a fang needed to craft the Masamune, the team teleport to another lab containing dragon eggs and blueprints, finding a cog for the elevator shaft in the process. Next, an American B-17 bomber over the facility is shot down by the team using a Flak 88 cannon, of which the wreckage provides another cog. If the bomber flies over the facility and the team are not yet there to shoot it down, the bomber is reset back in time to the start of its flight path over the base. After finding the third and final cog, the 2.0 characters repair the elevator and travel down into the depths below. The elevator stops deep underground, with nothing but a thick vine-covered tunnel ahead. The path ahead is slowly cleared by the Masamune, revealing an abandoned, top-secret experiments chamber containing a large thrasher which subsequently attacks the characters, initiating the ultimate boss battle. Eventually, Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen defeat the thrasher and clear the chamber of all remaining enemies, revealing Takeo 1.0 in an utterly sorry state from the hands of Division 9.
Your eyes, I recognize them. Almost as though they were my own. Takeo Musaki. I did not believe I would find you in such a place. I was a warrior. I fought many great battles for the glory of our nation, for the honor of the dying samurai spirit. I was a hero. I share this memory. I have lived many of the same victories. I later learned that my victories were unwelcome. His betrayal was driven by petty jealousy. He knew I could endure anything, that I feared not even my own death. Punishment is one thing. This is cruelty. Who could be so evil as to desire another soul to endure such suffering? Who amongst us could be so dishonorable? Are you so blinded by your own loyalty? The orders came from the Emperor himself. My life, my path, is built upon a lie. This realm may have been corrupted and consumed by evil, but we possess the power to change things. The better tomorrow is only possible if we blow away the ashes of the past. None of us choose the means by which mercy will find us. But I am at peace. I understand what must be done. Will you be my kaishakunin? It is my honor.
Guess it's you next, Nikolai.
Nein. There is something else we must do. There is a chain of events that must be set in motion.
With Takeo 1.0's soul now secured within the summoning key, Richtofen is but another step closer to completing his and Maxis' plan to repair the damage done to the universe. Seeing the fate at which Dempsey and Takeo 1.0 had perished, Nikolai was ever the more wary of what this meant for the fate of his 1.0 self. However, there was something important that needed to be done before commencing the final stretch of his plan involving the soul of Nikolai 1.0. The 2.0 characters teleport to Mob of the Dead in order to collect 8 vials containing the cursed blood of the Mob of the Dead characters, 2 vials per character. Before Black Ops 3 was released, Treyarch had teased the storyline concept of only the cursed survive. If the 2.0 characters had this cursed blood, they could survive a certain event which awaited them, to be revealed later. In Richtofen's words, the blood vials are the 2.0 team's insurance policy, in case they don't like where they end up if the plan is to succeed. The blood would act as a paradox in the ether because no such blood from other realms could exist within the perfect world after the teleporter is destroyed and every other universe and dimension sealed off from the ether. As such, the paradox would give the 2.0 team an escape route to leave their eternal fates within the ether. One final note is that, whilst the 2.0 characters are collecting the blood vials in Mob of the Dead, Weasel overhears them talking about how Nikolai 1.0's soul is their next objective, explaining how Weasel had heard Nikolai's name within the four mobsters' endless cycle of terror inside their twisted iteration of Alcatraz. With the blood vials obtained, the 2.0 crew teleports back to Zetsubou and Shima to continue fighting the undead until the game ends, teleporting away just as the giant apothecon swamp monster arises again from the depths of the ocean to threaten the island, proving Nansatwe's sacrifice to have gone in vain. Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen 2.0 arrive in Stalingrad, the beating heart of Hitler's attempt to conquer Soviet Russia. Only this time, they had arrived in a distorted universe, where the city had been rocked by new superweapons created by both sides. The Soviets had received stolen Group 935 blueprints, using them to mirror the giant German combat robots, thus producing Soviet equivalents, as well as heavily armoured foot soldiers known only as the Manglers, along with new mech vehicles, in one of which Nikolai 1.0 resided. On the German side came Dragons, the Gauntlet of Siegfried, Valkyrie drones and the Raygun Mark III, all having been produced by Group 935, aside from the Dragons which exist due to Samantha's actions inside Agartha, although in this universe, Group 935 had figured out a way to control them from their research at Griffin Castle. After quickly realising they are several thousand feet in the air, the 2.0 characters spot a soldier with an unopened parachute nearby, which they use to land safely. This soldier is actually a version of Peter McCain, who had entered a portal whilst working as a spy inside a Group 935 facility within some other universe, and just so happened to exit the same portal from which the 2.0 characters had come from Zetsubou and Shima. Once the 2.0 team had regrouped on the ground, they attempt to contact Nikolai 1.0. However, a dragon attacks Nikolai 1.0's mech, resulting in him being thrown into the side of a building, beginning the 2.0 character's quest to collect the soul of Nikolai 1.0. The 2.0 characters explore the shattered ruins of this warped version of Stalingrad, coming across a series of radio logs. These radios give insight into just how this once great city became such a crumbling wasteland from a long forgotten yet still highly important individual, Sophia. In Sophia's first log, she explains how the Germans used Element 115 to infect the ranks of the Red Army. Afterwards, Group 935's newly designed Valkyrie drones were sent to scour the area for resistance, attempting capture of any Red Army soldiers using their electrical stun weapons. Dr. Groff had instructed Sophia to specifically program Valkyrie drones 7 and 8 to penetrate enemy lines and attempt to capture 115 infected Soviet soldiers, who were then to be sent back to Group 935 outposts for scientists to study how the 115 was affecting their bodies, until they inevitably turned. However, Sophia had lost contact with Valkyrie Drone 8 after it engaged one of their selected targets. In her second log, Sophia explains how the German Dragon units had devastated the Soviet ground forces. However, the Soviets had found a weakness in the Dragons, which they exploited into a new weapon designed specifically to take out the German Dragons. This weapon? the Asylon Lance, was fitted into the Soviets' remaining mech units. The third log discusses the surprise by the German side when they encountered the Soviet giant combat robot battalions for the first time. What shocked them the most was that the Soviets had fitted their robots with high-energy laser beams fired from the eye position. These robots had been almost identically designed to the original German designs, and so they were highly durable against most conventional attacks. However, the Germans hadn't designed their robots to be resistant to dragon fire, meaning the dragons had been able to inflict significant damage against the Soviets' robots, showing why there are at least 2 destroyed Soviet robots in Gorod Krovi. The fourth and final log states that one of Group 935's dragon control procedures had gone slightly wrong, which Sophia had hoped to correct before Dr. Groff's coming inspection. Sophia had implemented changes to the procedures as to which she believed would correct the issue. She proceeds to commence a live test during the recording within Group 935's Stalingrad remote hatchery. However, during the test, one of the dragons seems to resist the procedure and becomes infuriated towards the scientists, leaving Sophia no choice but to evacuate the facility. So, with the radios heard, the 2.0 characters realise they must find and input 3 dragon control circuits into a central control system, which collectively allows the dragons to be harnessed. These network circuits are launched down in Groff modules from the moon. Remember, Gorod Krovi takes place during the Battle of Stalingrad, meaning Gorod Krovi can be at any point in time between August 1942 to February 1943. The moon was blown up and Dr. Groff killed in the Eisendrache, which takes place in 1945, explaining how the moon still exists and Groff is still alive within Gorod Krovi. Once each Groff module lands in Stalingrad, the team collects the 3 network circuits and connects them to the central system server, allowing the dragons to be commanded. They ride a dragon to the hatchery, discovering Group 935's dragon control systems in the process. Upon returning to central Stalingrad, the 2.0 characters are contacted by Nikolai 1.0, who tells them that unless they are here to support him in his fight against the undead and Group 935's dragons, they must leave immediately. Not long after, Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen 2.0 are contacted by a second voice, the voice of the mysterious Dr. Monty, who explains to them that he had been watching their every move fighting through the crumbling ruins of the multiverse. Dr. Monty states that the 2.0 characters are more than partially responsible for the utter state at which the central universe is in, but says that he'll help them out in their quest to fix it whenever he can. Upon further exploration, the 2.0 team uncover several wisps, allowing Dr. Monty to temporarily communicate with them across the rift. It's time for Dr. Monty to reveal the grand truth to the 2.0 characters. He begins by explaining the concept of the central universe. It's infinitely big, ever increasing in size. It's also ever changing and shifting across and beyond both space and time. Then Monty proceeds to explain how the universe became fractured by a particular event. This fracture shattered the universe into millions of other spin-off universes, all coexisting at the same time, yet all having slightly different variations of the events from the one central universe that was fractured. Dr. Monty states that he is indeed omnipotent, in other words, an all-seeing, all-controlling godlike being, but even with this power, he still cannot keep track of each of the millions upon millions of spin-off universes now in existence. Dr. Monty continues to explain that, due to factors outside of his control, in other words, the entire apocalypse, the 2.0 characters would be the last people he would normally have entrusted with such an important task as repairing the central universe. The universe is deeply unstable, and things were going to get a lot worse before they got any better. However, Dr. Monty does say that he intended to give each of the 2.0 characters some one-on-one time to explain the events and meanings of their own personal lives. As each character found a break from the heavy fighting between themselves and the undead across Stalingrad, They are briefly and telepathically spoken to by Dr. Monty. Firstly was Tank Dempsey. Dr. Monty explains that Dempsey had done really well so far, but Monty still needed to talk him through some things. Dempsey had been travelling across space and time for years, to the point where he could no longer be certain about who he actually was, largely due to how Dempsey 1.0's prolonged exposure to Element 115 had caused severe memory loss, which, in turn, has morphed into the mind of Dempsey 2.0. Monty also commented on how Dempsey 2.0 was still calling in field reports, even though no one was anywhere even close to hearing them, since he was currently way off in some distant universe. But Monty did say that Dempsey was a good soldier, and always had been, following orders to the last letter. Finally, Dr. Monty questions why Dempsey had been following Richtofen's plan to save the universe, considering how Dempsey 1.0 had despised Richtofen 1.0. Monty simply tells Dempsey to keep an eye on Richtofen, for he may be up to something which Dempsey didn't know about. For Nikolai, Monty expresses sympathy for everything he had been through, and everything he was about to go through, once they got a hold of his 1.0 self. Nikolai had tried so very hard to forget deep pains from the earlier life of his 1.0 self. But, due to Elements 115, Nikolai 2.0 also experienced those same pains and bad memories. Monty acknowledged that there were some things which couldn't be changed despite how hard he tried to forget. All he asked was that Nikolai 2.0 do the right thing when it came to it, so very soon. Regarding Takeo, Dr. Monty discusses how Takeo had been betrayed by what he had spent his entire life honouring. As such, Takeo no longer had a driving force in his life, no longer had a reason to do the things he did. However, Monty argues that Takeo should not give up, but to continue fighting for himself, rather than some misplaced sense of duty for others who only intended to use Takeo to advance their own agendas. Changing the mood of his conversation, Monty asked Takeo if he'd noticed anything unusual about Richtofen or Dempsey. Almost as though Monty was trying to stir up tensions amongst the 2.0 group, he tells Takeo to keep an eye on Richtofen and Dempsey, for they could be scheming something between themselves. And finally, Richtofen. Monty begins by thinking back to Dr. Maxis 2.0 in Origins, how Richtofen had saved Maxis' life by constructing him a drone to protect his brain and soul from Element 115. Maxis then opens the portal to Agartha/the Ether before things really began to get out of hand during the Black Ops 3 maps. That was when Dr. Monty was forced to step in. He then brings up Samantha, how her blind rage at Richtofen and the other 935 scientists had caused this entire mess to begin with, all the way back during Black Ops and World at War. She had been experimented on by other members of Group 935, betrayed by her own father who was supposed to keep her safe and protect her from harm, as any father should do to his daughter. But that was a long time ago, many universes ago, many histories ago. Samantha 2.0 was safe now, in the house, the ether, the perfect world. With the one-on-ones complete, Monty continues to leave the 2.0 characters more messages via wisps. He confirms that what happens in Origins was all real, that all happened. But where things get slightly more complicated with branching storylines and the multiverse is after Origins. Events that continue play out naturally up until the early stages of World War II, when the certain events that causes the fracture of the universe occurs. That was when things seriously went south. Richtofen 1.0 has never known about the multiverse and its dire consequences, arrogantly continuing along with his ultimate plan as though everything was fine and dandy. His plan being to control the zombies, as shown through the World at War and Black Ops Zombies maps. Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo just blindly followed Richtofen 1.0 around, helping him complete his malicious plan whilst not remembering any of their past and future actions due to Element 115, clearly confirming the endless time cycle of which they are trapped within. He further explains the multiverse by using an analogy to snowflakes, that many think they are all unique when actually there's just one or two designs. In simple words, Dr. Monty is saying that the Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen from the Central Universe were all just fragmented into millions of different universes due to the fracture of the main universe. Although there are some differences between each universe's version of Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen, they are all basically the same. Monty states that, in an ideal world, he would just stay on the sidelines and allow human free will to determine what happened in the universe. However, every now and then he sees something which he cannot allow to take course, for example, the fracturing of the universe, and thus he is forced to intervene to put things right, hence why he's in the storyline. However, there's only so much he can do. He can't just manually put the universe in a good shape. All he can do is give events a nudge in the right direction and just hope it's enough to sort things out. Lastly, Dr. Monty explains that, all along, it was and is he who is providing the mystery boxes, the bonus drops, the perks, the gumball machines, the war weapons, and so forth to the maps. Anyway, with the 2.0 characters now much more aware of what is happening around them due to their talks with Dr. Monty, they set out to find and collect the soul of Nikolai 1.0 to realise Richtofen's plan to break the cycle and repair the Central Universe. Their first order of operations was to collect the master code cylinder, which, once inserted into the central system server of Gorod Krovi, reveals that, in this distorted universe, Sophia is actually a robot. Sophia scans her records, finding that the 2.0 characters are friends with Dr. Maxis, and so she can trust them. Next, with the help of Sophia, they initiate the Ascension Protocol phases, allowing them to gain access to Group 935's computer systems across Stalingrad. But first, they encounter a failsafe implemented by Group 935 should the area fall to enemy hands. Several explosive charges had been planted across the surrounding buildings, rigged to blow if the Ascension Protocol was initiated without proper authorization. So, the 2.0 characters scour the area and defuse the explosives, allowing them to proceed with caution to the next stage. Sophia detects a rogue Valkyrie drone in Belinsky Square. This is Valkyrie 8, the drone which Sophia had lost contact with before the station was overrun. Sophia analyses Valkyrie 8 to find out where and when in space-time it had malfunctioned. Meanwhile, a rogue Mangler is also detected, which Sophia needs access to. Once she has, another Groth module is launched down from the moon containing some important cargo which the characters retrieve from the pod. Next, Sophia reveals that this cargo has allowed the soul of Gersh to be transported through dimensions and into Gorod Krovi. Remember, Stalingrad was his hometown. Gersh is shocked at the state of his city, but becomes confused and calls out for the children, which he knows exist in the house due to his time in the Dark Ether, in which he saw the children, and thus understands of their significance to saving the universe. But obviously, he saw a demented version of the children as it was the Dark Ether he was trapped inside of. Gersh recognises the 2.0 characters, but wonders why they look different to the 1.0 characters, who he remembers from his 1.0 self in Ascension. After receiving the soul of Gersh 2.0, Sophia proceeds to extract information from his brain. With that complete, Sophia gives the 2.0 characters a specific keycard which they need to take to the hatchery to download some important information. With that done, Sophia analyses the information, revealing that Group 935 had kept it secret from her. In return, she passes over a power core to fix Nikolai 1.0's mech after his original core was broken as he was thrown into the building by the dragon. Once Nikolai 1.0 receives his new power core, he asks the 2.0 characters to help him defeat the dragons. Meanwhile, Sophia completes the Ascension Protocol and escapes from her entrapments within the Group 935 computer systems of Gorod Krovi. Sophia states that she must go to Maxis to resolve the paradox and to break the cycle, and thus flies off into a portal to the ether. With Nikolai 1.0's new power core fitted into his mech suit, he breaks free from the rubble and proceeds to attack the dragons. At first, our 2.0 characters help Nikolai 1.0 because they know the dragons could potentially be a threat to them too. So, they defeat the dragon with help of Nikolai 1.0. But their comradeship with Nikolai 1.0 was inevitably to come to an end, as they revealed that they had come to collect his soul. As expected, Nikolai 1.0 is infuriated and attempts to kill the 2.0 characters, leading to the final battle between the two parties. As Nikolai 1.0's mech is slowly destroyed, his 2.0 self prepares for what must be done.
You think you will kill me now? I am sorry, Nikolai. I wish there was another way. But know this, in my heart, I share the same pain as you. The pain that you have buried and blurred beneath an alcohol-fueled haze. Yes, the pain of your own memory. You loved and you lost. Everything else has been delusional fantasy that distance you from painful truth. You know what I speak of. You remember. Before the bombs fell. Before she was taken from us. Some things are forgotten. For a reason!
It is done. The souls have been collected, Maxis. We will see you soon.
And it's done. The 3 1.0 souls are sent to the ether, spawning 3 children taking the identities of Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo. Richtofen already had his soul in the house as Eddie, which we saw during the Origins ending cutscene, explaining why his soul isn't sent up into the sky during the Gorod Krovi ending. As Dr. Monty confirms, this is because Richtofen had already been in the house for ages, during his time spent researching the multiverse with Maxis. Despite some of the fiercest opposition humankind will ever know, Richtofen never gave up and pursued his dream of a perfect world, safe for the character's immortal souls with no time cycle. It's also revealed Nikolai's severe vodka addiction came from his attempts to wash away the pain from losing his wife in a German bombing raid on Stalingrad, all to no avail. Seeing that the 2.0 characters had been successful in their quest to retrieve the 1.0 souls, Dr. Monty telepathically contacts Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo, but not Richtofen. He tells the 3 that it's almost time to come to the house, but he also warns that their futures all rely on Richtofen seeing the final stages of the plan through, implying maybe Richtofen isn't being as honest with Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo as maybe he should be. So as the 2.0 characters finish up at Gorod Krovi, The big question in the air now is, are Richtofen's blood vials actually intended to advance his own agenda? Or is Dr. Monty perhaps not as allied as he may seem? Many thousands of years ago existed two elders, two higher, omnipotent beings. These men were the best of friends, keeping the universe protected whilst having many great times joking and laughing together. They were the supreme commanders of the Keepers, ensuring everything remained right within the universe. But one day, the Apothecans got hold of one of them. From that point onward, this man became the Apothecan's personal agent, zipping across dimensions, carrying out their wishes to the last letter. This man is the Shadow Man. Dr. Monty's once kind best friend, now the bringer of death and destruction. Ever since he was corrupted by the Apothecans, the Shadow Man became the evil Nyarlathotep character all too familiar within the minds of the final few defending the universe from his Apothecan overlords. Before they arrive in the ether, several monologues are revealed by each of the 2.0 characters, expressing their innermost thoughts about what awaits them in the ether. Dempsey begins by once again calling in a field report, stating that Richtofen is barely holding it together. He reflects upon the time when he was forced to kill his 1.0 self, expressing deep regret, but at the same time knowing it is for the greater good. Dempsey believes in Richtofen, but isn't certain about how it will all play out once they arrive in the house. Nikolai remembers back to when he lost his wife, stating his 1.0 self was lost beyond the point of no return due to his deepest regret. Although he wishes he did things differently in the past, he has no doubts that his actions will ensure that the children see a better tomorrow. Takeo discusses how time is the ultimate force in life, either being your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on how you spend it. Takeo says that we should reflect on the past, learning from mistakes whilst using them to advance forward. Only then could we truly understand ourselves. Another monologue is released by Richtofen, who explains that he had been trying so very hard to do the right thing. Long ago, a long time ago, when Richtofen sought to control the undead and gain ultimate power in World at War and Black Ops, he made a promise to the Shadow Man to protect him, to be his personal servant, in return for control over the undead. In doing that, he had done bad things, but he didn't regret it, because soon all those heinous acts will all be undone. Therefore, none of it really mattered. He had lied, cheated, and deceived to get to where he is now, for a purpose deciding the fate of the universe. Dr. Monty had thought Richtofen did not know about what will happen to the characters in the house, but he does. The blood vials, Richtofen's paradox, will protect the crew. The final monologue is from Dr. Monty. He explains that, a long time ago, when Group 935 created teleporters to travel through space, and unbeknownst to them, also time, they had changed the rules of the universe. Using these devices to travel across space-time, they had opened portals to other dimensions, other worlds, to far greater evils than anything they could have comprehended. Science that went way beyond even their wildest of imaginations. What Group 935 had ever known was only the tip of a very big iceberg. But the incompetence, the desires and greed of Dr. Maxis and other higher-ups for weapons of war kept them blinded to just what darkness they were gradually unveiling from beyond the perceptions of their senses. The teleporters had changed the rules. During one specific botched use of the teleporter, the level of Element 115 in use fell below the absolute minimum level required. As we learned from the previous cipher, the foundations of space-time collapsed, creating unthinkable consequences on the state of the universe. It was Group 935's teleporters which caused the fracture of the central universe. Group 935 were unwittingly responsible for this all along. So, it was time. Dr. Monty meets the four characters in a frozen forest, exact location unknown. He briefly fills them in on some things before teleporting to the ether, with the 2.0 characters following shortly after. And so, the 2.0 characters arrive in the house. Richtofen is finally reunited with Dr. Maxis after so long. Maxis believed his faith in his close friend's mission would not go in vain, and he was right. Together, the two Germans enact the final stage of their plan and destroy the teleporter once and for all, forever closing the portal to the ether opened in Origins, sealing off every other universe in existence, keeping the ether and the children eternally protected from harm in this perfect world. Their disastrous invention, which had borne so much damage and destruction, was forever eradicated into the textbooks of history. It was finally done. Their plan had succeeded. The apocalypse was ended. Or so they had thought. The thing is, Dr. Max's 2.0 soul was never actually fused into the house. His body was physically there, but his soul was never morphed into an immortal child version of himself. When the Maxis drone was sent to the house in Origins, it only contained his brain. His soul was still within his original decapitated body in northern France. Eddie was Richtofen's immortal child version. Maxis was the only character who didn't have a soul in the house. Therefore, he was still vulnerable to apothecary influence and corruption. Unbeknownst to Dr. Monty, the Shadow Man was inside the summoning key from the events of Morgue City. The Shadow Man telepathically whispers to Maxis, brainwashing and manipulating him into freeing the Shadow Man from the summoning key, whilst Maxis becomes trapped inside it. As such, the Shadow Man escapes, using his power to create a giant wormhole within the ether, allowing the apothecary armies to teleport in from the dark ether and wreak havoc across the ether, shattering its very foundations to the core. Dr. Monty realizes what is happening and finally introduces our 2.0 characters to the Apothecans, the greatest evil in existence. The Apothecans' aim is to corrupt every last dimension and universe with their own personal evil, the zombies. Giant tentacle-bearing Apothecans fired meteorites containing Element 115 through wormhole portals into each and every dimension, meaning the meteors from Tunguska, Shinonuma, Pennsylvania, the Moon, Shangri-La, Morgue City, der Eisendrache, etc. had all come crashing down to the Earth as a result of the Apothecans firing them through multi-dimensional portals from the dark ether. They had sourced their 115 from a giant blue Apothecan sun containing an almost infinite supply of Element 115. It's now clear why the ancient order of the Keepers had been kidnapping and sacrificing people to the Apothicons back during Shadows of Evil. They had tried to satisfy the far more powerful Apothicons to prevent them from launching Element 115 down not just into Morgue City, but across the entire globe. Ordinary people had been continuing their daily lives for years, totally oblivious to how the fate of the universe was being fought for by an ancient cult from beneath their city. In a multi-dimensional battle between good and evil, taking place so close to the residents of Morgue City yet so far from the perception of their senses. Upon hurtling meteors through the interdimensional portals, the Apothicons waited for their Element 115 to raise the dead, corrupting the universe and leaving it under the direct influence of the Apothicon overlords. That is how the zombie apocalypse began. Right from the very beginning of our storyline, all the way back in World at War, the Apothicons had been lurking unseen within the shadows, using 115 to create continuous isolated zombie outbreaks across the globe, as Richtofen made a deal with the Shadow Man to carry out his orders in return for being able to take direct control of the zombies in Moon. Even Samantha, who had had control of the zombies throughout World at War and Black Ops, followed the wishes of the Apothicons to the very last word, but being such a small and naive little girl, she had absolutely no idea with just what evil she was dealing with. Anyhow, Dr. Monty informs the 2.0 team that they are now going head to head with the forces of the Apothicons in a direct battle for control of the ether. If the 2.0 characters reign supreme, the ether will be restored, allowing the children to live in safety for all eternity, whilst the Apothicons will be eternally destroyed. But if the Apothicons emerge victorious, they will ultimately have succeeded in their plan to corrupt every realm in existence with the undead, killing the children in the process and ensuring a total zombie apocalypse. This is it. The endgame. The decider. Upon leaving the house, the 2.0 characters witnessed the scale of destruction inflicted upon the ether by the Apothicons. Zombies, corrupted keepers, and armies of Apothicon beasts roam this ruined world as giant Apothicon monsters swarm around a mass of torn out worlds fused together into one giant whirlwind of different places from long ago. Several Apothicon corruption engines are stationed across these islands, holding the key to controlling the large airborne Apothicons, with one in particular having eaten the Pack-a-Punch machine. As the 2.0 characters come to grips with the fusion of different worlds, each of the 4 corruption engines become active, transforming the blue Apothicon sun into a hellish satanic red colour, as the Shadow Man taunts the characters with the sheer strength of the Apothicon armies tightening their grip around the ether. For the last time, the characters stumble across a number of radio recordings as they traverse the dangerously unstable tangle of worlds. The first is between Dr. Maxis and Dr. Monty in the house, just before the 2.0 characters arrive in the ether following Gorod Krovi. It's then revealed that each of the radio recordings we've heard from Maxis throughout the previous Black Ops 3 maps, all along it was just him repeating what Dr. Monty was telling him to say in the background, conveying how Maxis' unstable emotional state was just enabling him to be used as a pawn by Dr. Monty. The next few documents more information as to what happened to the Call of the Dead characters in the 2.0 universe. Sarah Michelle Gellar 2.0 explains that the rest of the cast had been missing for at least 6 weeks, and she had begun to trawl through George Romero's research, finding that Romero had conducted research into time travel and other dimensions and universes. Romero 2.0 had discovered the story of the 1.0 characters, and that's why he wanted to film his new movie in Siberia, at least in the 2.0 universe, to try to find a fragment of Richtofen 1.0's legendary quest to take over the world. Sarah Michelle Gellar continues to state that George Romero 2.0 had conducted further research into the tale of Brock and Gary 1.0 and how they were searching for the focusing stone and a potential gateway to the ether. Furthermore, Gellar had uncovered some Black Sun symbols from Romero's research. Gellar 2.0 had begun to play around with some of Group 935's technology she had found at Call of the Dead, including teleporters. She accidentally activates one, arriving at Shangri-La during the solar eclipse, and fights the zombies that subsequently chase her. Sarah Michelle Gellar states that she thinks she had died in the past, but couldn't be sure, being yet another example of the effects from the cycle. Sarah Michelle Gellar then reads aloud the exact transcript from the very first radio recording ever heard, all the way back during Shinonuma. Gellar 2.0 had sent this message to Peter 2.0, hoping that he would receive it in the 2.0 universe and thus perhaps use his knowledge to help break the cycle. In another recording, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara 2.0 is broadcasting to anyone who could possibly hear him that the Pentagon was under attack by zombies. He had managed to lock himself inside a janitor's closet, but unfortunately, JFK, Nixon and Castro had all been killed by the undead. He hoped this message would reach someone able to help him. Another set of radios come from Sophia back during Kino de Toten in the Gorod Krovi universe. She discusses Maxis' progress with controlling Patient 2-6 using new treatments, as heard all those years ago. However, just as with back then, Patient 2-6 lost control and thus was killed during a field test. Maxis thought Patient 2-6 had only attacked the handler, but little did he know, Sophia was also infected. She was experiencing erratic thoughts, high fevers and cold sweats. Considering Sophia and Maxis were in a relationship, she feared she couldn't keep it secret from Maxis for long. As expected, Maxis soon enough did learn about what happened to Sophia. During Maxis' final recording from Kino de Toten, it is revealed that Sophia is actually responsible for the sudden knocking on the door which interrupts the recording. Maxis had secretly spiked a cup of tea which he gave to Sophia to drink, whilst he asked her about whether she was feeling alright. Just as Maxis asks to see Sophia's arm, Sophia coughs, splutters and collapses to the ground. Maxis says that what he's about to do is for Sophia's own good, taking her brain and fusing it into a robotic device to preserve her life, just as Richtofen had done to Maxis to preserve his life in Origins. He had saved his beloved Sophia's life, in the only way he had known how. In the subsequent recording, Maxis is testing out Sophia's new robot device, the Strategic Operations Planning Heuristic Intelligence Analyzer, short for Sophia. Sophia is startled about her new form, exclaiming that she is blind. Maxis calmly responds by stating that these reactions are normal, that her vision should be restored within several hours. Sophia remains horrified and begins to cry. Several encoded messages are then found by the characters. The first is from Monty at some point in the future, just before the time cycle is due to reset itself. He sounds relieved that the 115 and the Apothecants have been eternally banished from the ether, that the house now sits safe for all infinity, thanks to the sacrifice made by Dr. Maxis and his girlfriend, Sophia. Their time together was limited, for what had to be done was non-negotiable, even if it meant saying goodbye for the last time. Another begins to piece together why we have been continuously sighting the Mob of the Dead escape plane throughout Black Ops 3 Zombies, flying overhead in shadows of evil, sitting on the top of a lab in the Giant, and trying to conceal itself amongst the dogfighting planes in Zetsubou or Shima. The cipher was written by one of the Mob of the Dead characters after their plane had crashed, but in a universe where the cycle is broken in Mob of the Dead. They still crash land their plane somewhere, but it's not the Golden Gate Bridge. This mobster talks about having flown over areas that shouldn't have been there. He thinks they travelled through time and space. That's why the Mob of the Dead escape plane is seen flying over Shadows of Evil and Zetsubou or Shima. During their escape flight from Alcatraz, they were warped across the multiverse and across many other dimensions, over Morgue City and Pompeii, due to Element 115's disruption upon universes. They crash land on the roof of the lab in the Giant, but this mobster states that there were no signs of any bodies or other remains. As the battle rages across the ether, both Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man telepathically contacts the characters. Whilst the Shadow Man was more intent on taunting the characters by boasting of the sheer power of the Apothecans, also resorting to the old, ominous mind games used to manipulate the Shadows of Evil characters into doing what he wanted, Dr. Monty reveals that he didn't appear to have as much control over what was going on than what the characters had originally thought. Dr. Monty warns the characters not to trust a word the Shadow Man says, despite how convincing he may be. With everything said and done, Richtofen 2.0 informs the others that it was time to begin the ultimate fight to take out the Apothecans. He warns that some or maybe all of the characters could be killed during the process due to the magnitude of power they are going up against. But as long as the Apothecans are defeated and the children saved for all eternity, it is a risk which must be taken. Wishing each other the very best of luck, for the very last time, they endeavour on their final quest in history. Their first task is to collect the bones and skull of Sophia's body, using the Apothecan servants to transport and assemble them within Nachtranthoten. Sophia's actual body then lies lifeless on the ground. Their next task is to help phase Sophia into the ether, because, for some reason, when she travelled here from Gorod Krovi, she didn't quite phase in properly. Using the Apothecan laser turrets protecting the corruption stations, the 2.0 characters are able to pull Sophia fully into the ether. By instinct, she knows she must go to Maxis. The characters teleport to Samantha's room in the house, finding the Kronorium which Richtofen had left there once they had arrived from Stalingrad. The Kronorium is placed upon the lectern on the Kino de Toten stage, creating a blue rune diagram on the floor within the projector room. The characters find several gateworm eggs, then incubate these eggs within the giant Apothecan to spawn 4 gateworms. The gateworms are traded in through dimensions to the keepers, who, in return, provide rune symbols required to perform the projector room ritual. Upon collection, the characters are teleported to a chasm harbouring a giant gateworm, where the rune symbols must be matched to complete the ritual, amidst a large battalion of Apothecans attempting to prevent them from doing so. Once the ritual is complete, the characters retrieve the summoning key from the chasm. Dr. Monty contacts Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo telepathically, explaining how Richtofen had snatched the summoning key from the keepers back during Morgue City. They used the summoning key to collect several interdimensional items of significance from the different worlds, such as the glitch machine gun fountain turret from Verrucht and the Nachtranthoten explosive barrels. With that done, the objects are sent to Sophia in the house. She rendezvous with the 2.0 characters, who gather their gear, preparing for what lay ahead. And this was it. It was time for the 2.0 characters and Sophia to go head to head with the Shadow Man. The fate of the Ether now depended solely on what happens next. They teleport to the Gatesworm Chasm, where the Shadow Man is already waiting within a protective shield. He summons every last Apothecon army under his control to throw everything they had at the 2.0 team. The Shadow Man knew he was vulnerable, but had defeated so many before the 2.0 crew. In his eyes, this was going to be just another walk in the park. He had a vast array of Apothecon dark magic in his hands, not to mention the thousands upon thousands of Apothecons approaching the chasm. Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo, Richtofen and Sophia begin to fend off the undead approaching. Sophia drops the summoning key to the characters, who place it upon a pedestal to attract the attention of the Apothecons. The souls of the undead gain Sophia power to direct a laser beam at the Shadow Man's shield, temporarily bringing it down. Now was the time where everything hung in the balance. Remembering how far they had all come and how close they were to putting everything right and cleansing the ether of Elements 115 forever. Remembering how much pain and uncertainty they had all been through to get to this moment, almost as though time itself was slowing to a standstill, Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen glimpse each other's eyes, confirming what had to be done next. Without further instruction, the four unleash hell upon the Shadow Man, raining bullets, bombs of all kinds, wonder weapons and anything else they had in their arsenal at him. As glimpses of the moments of death of their 1.0 selves flash across their minds, seeing the world perish under the undead monstrosities, every fibre of their beings burns with hatred towards the Shadow Man. As he desperately tried to avoid the rain of incoming fire, Richtofen marches up to the pedestal on which the Kronorium lay. Sophia lines up her directed laser beam, and together, the two Germans utilise the crossfire to deliver the final blow to the Shadow Man, who screams in agony as the laser penetrates straight through his body, killing him instantly. As Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen watch in bewilderment as the Apothecon armies fade from existence at the demise of their leader, Sophia hastily returns to the house. She summons all of the collected interdimensional items, fusing them into the summoning key containing her beloved Ludwig Maxis. Maxis and Sophia are reunited for the last time. Maxis states that he loved Sophia and cared so deeply for her. As Sophia revealed, she felt the exact same way towards him. They would do it together as the one they were, now and forever. Maxis' plan to save the universe was realised. It was all alright now, it would be over quick and painlessly. All he wanted now was to spend the last moments of his life with Sophia. They were free.
Sophia. We will do it together.
With the evil vanquished, I can start making it all nice again. No undead, no apothecons, no shadow man. All of it gone. Forever. But here's the funny thing. You snowflakes shouldn't even still be here. You should be fading out of existence by now. Those blood vials. I was wondering when you'd bring this up. They're from realities we've already closed off. They shouldn't be here. They can't be here. Such a paradox means you're putting my perfect world at risk. You guys and your bloody free will. What to do? What to do? Well, you certainly can't stay here. You could send us somewhere else. Somewhere we've never been. I suppose I could make a little corner somewhere in history. A place where I can dump some of the other shit that I've left over. Or I just wipe you from existence. Ooh, hang on. Actually, that all works out perfectly.
Having realised their victory, Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen returned to the house, where a jubilant Dr. Monty awaited. With the apothecons forever annihilated, he could put the universe right again. He could repair the fracture and allow the children to live safely for all eternity in his perfect world. But no matter how great their victory, there's always a but. Dr. Monty informs the characters they shouldn't still be remaining within existence. They should simply be fading from reality. Their souls were already fused into a child within the house. They couldn't possibly be here in the perfect universe. However, Monty notices the blood vials carried by the characters. He exclaims these blood vials are a paradox. They were from another universe already sealed off. With the blood vials present, Monty's perfect world could still be at risk from different versions of the apothecons from other universes. As Dr. Monty racks his brain in a desperate attempt to resolve the paradox and somehow gets rid of the 2.0 characters from his perfect world, Nikolai nods to Takeo, who begins to draw his sword with the intention of killing Dr. Monty to prevent him from endangering their very existence. However, before he has a chance to strike a fatal blow against Dr. Monty, Richtofen suggests that Monty could teleport the 2.0 characters to some distant corner of the universe, somewhere deep within history, where they're to remain far from the house and thus not be a realistic threat. However, Dr. Monty had already formulated a different plan, of which confirmed the characters' worst fears. He was going to attempt to wipe them from existence. But, as the paradox still remained unresolved, Dr. Monty soon discovers he can't just outright erase them from reality. He suddenly realises that Richtofen's blood vial paradox could actually work out completely in Monty's favour. Considering the blood vials acted as a bridge to all the other millions of universes they had previously sealed off, Monty teleports the 2.0 crew all the way back in time to another universe, making them Primis just before the Great Civil War was to start, where they wielded the elemental staffs to protect civilization from the attempts of the apothecons to corrupt the universe. Eventually, these Primis characters will die of natural causes, and thousands of years later, the 2.0 characters will be born again. They will meet in Origins again, they will fight through each of the Black Ops 3 maps again, until they are ultimately sent back in time in Revelations to take the form of Primis again in another universe. The cycle had continued. After all they had been through, after all that, the 2.0 characters' attempts to free themselves had failed because the cycle was never broken. All the way back in the Giant, Dr. Maxis had warned Richtofen that, in order to break the cycle, the 2.0 characters would all have to make the ultimate sacrifice: death. And that wasn't only for the 1.0 characters. The 2.0 crew would also have to die to successfully break the cycle, once and for all. This was only a two-way street. It was either the 2.0 characters survived and the cycle continued, or the 2.0 characters died and the cycle was broken. There was no other possible outcome. Death was the only way out. Through the collection of the blood vials, Richtofen showed he was not ready to make that sacrifice. He was not ready to die. The cursed had survived, but through this emerges the greatest conflict of interest in history. Richtofen wanted to end their eternal nightmare within the cycle, but at the same time he did not want neither himself nor the other three to die. This was simply not possible. Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo may have accepted the fact that they needed to die to end their eternal nightmare. However, Richtofen insisted they were not made any the wiser about their situation, and instead should just trust him. Perhaps, deep down, Richtofen feared the other three would embrace death if they knew it was the only way out. When Richtofen inevitably refused to turn his weapon against himself, Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo would most likely have killed Richtofen to prevent his selfishness from continuing their nightmare within the cycle. Hence why he always kept Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo in the dark. If they had not travelled to Mob of the Dead and therefore not collected the blood vials, they would all have been wiped from existence in the Revelations ending. If that had been the case, there would have been no paradox, the cycle would have been broken. But they did collect the blood vials, so the cycle continues for infinity. This explains why Richtofen 2.0 already had the blood vials in Origins. This explains why Nikolai 2.0 already had a bullet wound in his chest before he was shot by his 1.0 self in Gorod Krovi. This is why the 2.0 characters never had any perception of time. It's all just one never-ending loop of events which never begins and never ends, for there are an infinite number of other universes, and so there will always be another universe for Dr. Monty to teleport the crew to and make them Primis. As Samantha stated in Origins, they had no idea for how long they had been trapped in the cycle, for each time the cycle resets in the Revelations ending, their memories are also reset, meaning they have absolutely no recollection of any previous cycles, just as how the Mob of the Dead characters have their memories reset every time they complete the cycle by electrocuting themselves on the Golden Gate Bridge. Dr. Monty had succeeded in his plan to create a perfect world, where everything was right, where there were no apothecans, no zombies, no Element 115. Whilst Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen are trapped in the cycle for all eternity, the children live forever protected within the house, happily ever after. Dr. Monty is neither good nor evil. He was never an evil apothecon in disguise as a good guy. He simply had his own agenda, which just so happened to collude with that of Richtofen for so long until it came to deciding the 2.0 crew's ultimate fate. The Revelation's ending was a way for Treyarch to say that sometimes there are no happy endings. Sometimes it simply isn't possible for everyone to live happily ever after. Sometimes things are taken so far that they travel beyond the point of no return. The characters had tried so hard to put things right, to save themselves, but in the end, it never mattered because there were certain things needing to be done which even they couldn't agree to. They could never ascend from their darkness, despite how good their intent may have been. The Shadows of Evil's cipher proved right all along. Primis, also known as the 2.0 characters, had failed because they couldn't break the cycle. For now, this is where our story ends, a tale of desperation and hope never realised. Walking 1,000 miles only to fall on the final step, a warning to never become comfortable because it all could be gone just like that. You must ascend from darkness.